May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. I think I've got an excellent taste in music. My wife doesn't agree. There are things, I think I've told you before, that will go very badly for me if I play them in the car. One of those, perhaps maybe isn't quite as bad, is a song that I heard about 6 months ago now. It's a song that takes some words from a song by Eminem and some others. And some of the words go like this. If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? I heard it, did what I normally do when I hear a song that I like. I hit Shazam on your phone. I don't know if you use Shazam. I recommend it if you're in a cafe or whatever. You think, who's that they're playing? You hit the Shazam button and it goes, and it tells you who it is. It's recommended. It's free. And when it did that, the artist came up as Tyler Hates Life. And I thought, oh dear, this is one of those where Ruth wouldn't approve, because it's probably one of those darker kind of groups that sing some awful songs. But I looked them up anyway. And on his page with the songs on, it said this: if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And he had me hooked. He writes about life. He writes about his mental health issues. He writes about what God has been to him and done for him. And that call to hate even life itself compared to loving God. Jesus, as usual, is being controversial. I mean, it's par for the course, isn't it? You can't really imagine him going into a crowd, whether it's of all the ordinary people or of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and saying something forgettable, something that doesn't matter at all. This crowd was following him. They thought it was wonderful. He was the next big thing. John the Baptist had come and gone, and now there was him. The crowds followed him around the countryside. They wanted to hear what he had to say. Maybe they wanted to argue about what he had said or about what it meant. But they were all very excited. Great crowds went with him. And Jesus had to say something, because he knew many of them were just caught up in the enthusiasm. He's heading for Jerusalem. Nobody knows what's going to happen there, but he does. He knows that he's going to take a cross. In fact, someone else would have to carry the cross for him. And he was going to die. And his intention is to turn away the half-hearted potential followers. He's not interested in growing his group, growing the crowds that follow him just for growing the crowd's sake. He's looking for people who genuinely will follow him and acknowledge him as Lord. Napoleon writes of Jesus. I don't think I've ever quoted Napoleon. He writes this: he said, I know men, and I tell you that Jesus Christ is no mere man. Between him and every other person in the world, there is no possible term of comparison. Alexander the Great, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I have founded empires. But on what did we rest the creations of our genius? Upon force. Jesus Christ founded his empire upon love. And in this hour, millions of men would die for him. Jesus was looking for people who would love him so much that they would hate even their own lives, that they would give their own lives for him. He was looking for people who love him so much that in comparison, all those normal things that people love, he talks in another place about money and how you can't love both. You either love one and hate the other, or love the other and despise the one. He's saying he's looking for disciples who will love him so much that everything else pales into insignificance, all the things that we normally love. Jesus spoke of love again and again and again, but he uses this strong word to show how much we need to love him. Because then he says, if you want to be my disciple, whoever doesn't carry their cross and follow me doesn't make the grade. What does it mean to carry the cross? They had no clue that he was going to have to do this. He talked about it many times, but they hadn't got all. But to pick up your cross is to say, my life is over. Because there was only one destination. Barclay, the commentator, says it's possible to be a follower of Jesus without being a disciple, to be a camp follower without being a soldier. Jesus is looking for soldiers. He's looking for people who bow the knee and call him Lord. This is following Jesus at its simplest. He's not looking for people who will follow the latest thing. There have been many waves of that in the Christian church. I remember once, I need to keep these on. I remember once, I was in Durham, so it was a long time ago. It was about 35 years ago. I met two church members in the street who said to me, do you think we're going to miss out? And I said, miss out on what? They said, the Toronto blessing. Shouldn't you be going to Toronto to bring this blessing back for us? And I said, I remember having a long conversation with them. I said, are you saying God's not here? Are you saying God's not at work? And the people who are being baptized and the people who are giving their lives to Christ, and there are people who are sacrificing all for him. Our job is not to follow the latest big thing, but to follow him through thick and thin, carrying our cross, putting everything else aside. He was walking to his death, and he calls us to do the same. He calls us to leave everything else behind and to follow him. But then he goes on to use two examples. He talks about a tower. Don't you sit down and estimate the cost. People don't always do that. I don't know if you've been to Edinburgh, but if you have been to Edinburgh, on Calton Hill in Edinburgh, there's a thing that looks a bit like the Parthenon. It's the National Monument of Scotland. Well, actually, it was meant to be the National Monument of Scotland. Because after the Napoleonic Wars, they intended to put up a memorial to all the men who had died. It dominates the top of the hill. It was designed in 1823 to 26 by Charles Robert Cockrell and William Henry Playfair. It started construction in 1826 and was left unfinished in 1829 because they ran out of money. And so in Edinburgh, and I think particularly in Glasgow, they call it such things as Scotland's folly, Edinburgh's disgrace, the pride and poverty of Scotland. And I think, as I say, particularly in Glasgow, Edinburgh's folly. Not that there's any kind of rivalry between the two towns. Weigh it up, Jesus says. If you're going to start something, have a think about it before you start it. If you're going to follow someone, have a think about what it will cost and what it will mean. Whatever you do in life, don't just start it willy-nilly without thinking about the consequences. Think about them. I used to work in Edinburgh a lot, and I worked in Edinburgh for a charity. At the time, the Scottish Parliament was being built. It's quite a spectacular building. And I was sitting at breakfast on my own, and therefore I was listening into the conversation that was happening on the table next door, as you do. There were two men, one who worked in the building trade and one who actually built things, and one who was a surveyor, and they were having a chat. It was a kind of meeting breakfast. And he said, "How's it going at the Scottish Parliament?" He said, "Oh, it's great." He said, I thought it wasn't going that well. He said, "Well, it's not. Everything's behind time and nobody seems to know what they're doing." And he said, "I send my men up there to do the work and they tell them, 'Well, we're not ready for you yet. Come back in a month.'" And he said, "Oh, that's terrible. What do you do with them in the meantime?" Well, he said, "The thing is, they still pay my men as if they were there because they were supposed to be there, so I put them on another job. And then when I do send them the next time, he says, they pay me again." He said, "So it's terrible. It's really disorganized. But I'll tell you what," he said, "we're making a lot of money out of it." And that's why it cost an awful lot more than it was supposed to cost. But what about you and me? We say, perhaps to ourselves and perhaps to others, that we're followers of Christ. Maybe we keep it to ourselves a bit because we're not too sure. But Jesus says, count the cost before you say you're a follower of mine. Count the cost of following me. He doesn't promise us pie in the sky when we die. He doesn't promise us a wonderful life and everything will go swimmingly and everything will be great. No, he calls us to follow him, to acknowledge him as Lord. And just as Napoleon knew that if he said to his men, "Go and die for me," the Lord of heaven and earth may call upon us as well. Except out of love and not out of fear, as Napoleon said. Count the cost. I think sometimes we don't. And sometimes we do water down the message that Christ brings. When we say, "Oh, just come to church, it's wonderful, everyone's really nice." Well, that bit's true. At least it is here. And on Mark Bosworth as well, I didn't mean just to, but there's a challenge as well. There's a challenge. He says, "Come and follow me." He said to those fishermen, "Leave your nets. You're going to catch people from now on." This isn't just a nice warm place to meet. This is a place to come and hear what God longs to have from us. A relationship, calling him Lord and obeying his will. Oh, I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't change it for the world. But it's not always easy. It's not always straightforward. But after what he's done for me, how could I do anything else? After what he's done for me. He says, suppose a king is about to go war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to defeat 20,000? If he isn't able, he send a delegation. And really what he's saying with this example is he's saying to you and I, it's better what I've just said, don't be silly about this. In life, sometimes you have to weigh up the options. You have to weigh up, maybe because you're going to be in a fight about something, you have to weigh up, is this a fight you're going to win? You know, the biggest lesson I've learned in my life is that the one fight you're never going to win is the fight with God. When I was 18, I went to a missionary conference with my mother and father. Oh, I didn't want to go. That was the days before VHS or Betamax. And The Great Escape was on TV for the first time. And I wanted to see it. But off I went because, dutiful son. And at the end of the meeting, where they'd spoken about the work that was being done overseas, and they made an appeal not for people to give their lives to Christ, but for people to give their lives for service to God. I found myself standing in the upstairs gallery because that's what they said, stand up. And I, to this day, still don't know why I stood. I just did. And from that moment on, I fought God tooth and nail because I did not want to be a minister. I didn't want to be a minister of any kind. I was brought up in a Presbyterian church. I was attending a Baptist church by that point. I didn't want to be a minister. And I went off to university to do aeronautical engineering because I'd failed the medical for the RAF, and well, that was the next best thing. And for a year, I had a terrible time. I was doing my favourite subject, maths, which I'm sure is your favourite subject too. Found I couldn't do it anymore. Until finally I said to God, okay, you do what you want. 6 months before the start of the next university term, you do what you want. In 6 weeks I was in the Irish Baptist College with a full grant for all 4 years, even though I'd had a grant for the previous year doing aero engineering. And God, it was just like God saying to me, well, you said do what you want, and I did. And I've walked with him, not always completely faithfully, for those decades since. There have been times when it's been really tough. And there are still times it's tough. But I wouldn't do anything else. Why? Because this God has done for me what I cannot do for myself. Later on today, we're going to break bread and drink wine. He doesn't call me to follow him and say, because I'll do this for you and I'll do that for you. He calls me to follow him and says, this is already done. This is already done. You may perhaps be able to guess what I think of the present President of the United States. But I'm not going to speak ill of him just here. But I was really sad to hear, about 10 days ago, to hear him in a conversation, in an interview, say that he was wanting to bring peace because he hoped that by doing that, he might get into heaven. Here's a man who is the most powerful man in the world. There is no doubt about that. The man who controls the nuclear weapons that the Americans have, that only the Russians can rival in any way. The man who makes an executive order and people are thrown into prison, deported from the country, thrown out of the military. A man whose word, it seems, is law, and he doesn't know. And all those spiritual advisors who meet around him and put their hands up and hold him over them, or put their hands on him and pray for him, haven't told him the truth about God and his love for him. This man, who is the most powerful man in the world, hopes he might get to heaven by bringing peace in the Middle East. Well, he's on a hiding to nothing for that, and I'm sad about that. Because my prayer for him, like it is for everyone else that I come in contact with or know about, is that they might find the reality of the love that can be found in Jesus Christ, God's Son. And when we count the cost, we see that actually what he has done and how he has already forgiven us is so much better than anything we can do. And just like that king, we go and make terms with him. Instead of fighting and trying our own way and doing our best, we make terms with him. And my prayer for the President of the United States is that he will lose that fight with God, or he will, and better still, he will go and make terms and put his life into God's hands. Because from what he said 10 days ago, it isn't. And it's the same for you and I. God looks on him, the most powerful man in the world, and God looks on the homeless people that we see in Leicester or any other large town when we go in, he looks at them in exactly the same way. Have we made terms with God? Because it's not worth fighting him. Jesus says, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. God's terms are, give it all up. Give it all up. But he tells us that forgiveness comes and has already come through what he's done for us as he sends his son to die on the cross. We had one of my sons and one of Ruth's sons staying with us before school term started again. It was interesting. I couldn't watch the telly. They were making so much noise in the other part of the room that I turned the TV up, and then all I heard was, "Father, do you think you could turn the TV down a bit? We can't hear ourselves here." And I thought, okay, it's time to go somewhere else and do something else. But I'd do anything for them, whether they're my children or Ruth's children. And I wouldn't give any of them up for you or anybody else. But God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And all that God calls us to give up, and all that God calls us to lay to one side, and all that God calls us to be less important than we think they ought to be, is because of what he's already done for us. Because of already how much he loves us. If you are under the mistaken impression, or you know people who are under the mistaken impression that God's quite angry with you and really doesn't like you very much, then you are under the wrong impression. If you think that you need to try your hardest and do your best and try and make up for the things that you've done because he's a God who's hard to please, then think again. Oh, he is a God who is holy and perfect and who hates sin. But he's a God who, when we were still in our sin, when we knew nothing about him and couldn't care less about him, sent his Son to die for you and me. That's the love. He probably doesn't watch this, so I can say this of Alexander, who'd been with us. There is just about nothing he could do that would stop me loving him. I can't think of anything. Oh, I might. He's the goody-goody, and the other two will know that if they ever see this. He's the goody-goody. He's the one who always sort of towed the line and always did what was right. Probably that meant in the secret he got away with all sorts of things. But anyway, there is nothing our children, my children, our children could do that would stop me loving them. There's nothing that you could do that would stop God loving you. But he calls you and I to follow him. To count the cost. To pay the price. And to find that new life that's to be found in doing what he calls us to do.